Welcome to Soul Connections, a podcast about enchanting relationships with the human, more than human, and divine. I'm Emily, an astrologer, mystic, and herbalist.
I'm Aryn, an astrologer, writer, and creator.
And I'm Dani, a musician, astro minister, and organizer. We're your hosts. Join us for illuminating conversations with radiant guests and Astro Church sermons that weave astrology, mythology, and tarot.
Journey with us as we make meaning out of mystery through archetypes, patterns, and storytelling.
The longer I live, the more deeply I learn that love, whether we call it friendship or family or romance, is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light. Gentle work, steadfast work. Life-saving work in those moments when life and shame and sorrow occlude our own light from our view. But there is still a clear-eyed, loving person to beam it back. In our best moments, we are that person for one another. A quote by James Baldwin. Welcome to another episode of Soul Connections. Today is Friday, June 20th, the summer solstice, and the last day of Gemini season. And we have another Astro Church sermon for you. So we'll introduce ourselves as we always do and share our big threes. I'm Emily. I use she, her pronouns, and I have a Taurus sun, a Gemini moon, and I am a Leo rising.
My pronouns are they, them. I have a Capricorn sun and rising, and my moon is in Taurus.
And I'm Dani. I use she with a capital S and they pronouns. I have an Aries sun, a Pisces moon, and a Libra rising. Welcome to another Astro Church sermon. We place Astro Church at the end of the season to reflect on our lived experiences rather than try to predict them. Astro Church is about finding meaning in what we've been through, connecting deeply to the stories that we're living in, and discovering magic and hope for the future.
In this episode, we are going to be talking more about Gemini season. We're also going to be talking about a bug's life for our story connection. Our tarot card is the Knight of Swords, and our herbal connection is Lavender. Some of the themes that we'll be touching on today is networking. Where are our networks? How are we a part of them? Mobilizing, community and collective care, and also challenging duality and binaries. So this versus that thinking, Gemini is all about unpacking that. So I'm going to hand it over to Dani to do our universal shoutouts.
Thanks, Aryn. Universal shoutouts are a key part of the Astro Church space. Universal shoutouts are where we can share our griefs and our gratitudes for the people around us and our collectives, our networks, and our world. So we always open Astro Church with a group breath, and then we hold the space for anybody who wants to uplift somebody or talk about something that somebody is going through and just send some love and universal connection to them. You can participate in universal shoutouts if you want. There's links in all of our bios. You can follow those links to submit a universal shoutout, whether you want us to just hold that in our hearts as we do these sermons, or if you want us to say them on air, we can do both. So let us know. So I just want to invite my co-hosts, myself, our listeners, to just ground themselves in their seat or on the floor, wherever you are. And feel the push-pull connection between the heavens and the earth. Grounded in the earth and yet tethered to something bigger than all of us. So we just take 3 deep breaths together. Breathe in. Breathe out all the way up. Breathe in and breathe all the way out. Let it all out. One more time. Breathe in and then let it all out. I would just like to send a shout out to all the people everywhere in the United States and beyond that are resisting the occupation of militia forces that are acting illegally as immigration and customs enforcement, and are currently kidnapping people and brutalizing communities and tearing people apart and committing atrocities and crimes against humanity. There's a lot of resistance to that. And I just want to uplift every single person individually, every single individual relationship that goes into that resistance, every single idea, and all of those networks of people that are fighting back and resisting that because we don't need to comply ahead of time. So, universal shout out to them.
I would like to do a universal shout out for the queer community. Anyone under the big, expansive rainbow umbrella, queer, trans, gender nonconforming. Just, it's no coincidence that Pride Month falls within Gemini season. That feels very mercurial. And so I just want to give a universal shout out to every person who is queer, wherever they are at in their identity and that journey, and also to really uplift the struggles that our community is facing, especially our trans and BIPOC and gender nonconforming comrades and siblings in this community. The Supreme Court just a couple days ago upheld a horrendous court ruling, I believe, from the state of Tennessee that essentially opens the gates to ban gender affirming care for youth. And so I just want to hold all of the trans youth in our hearts and give them extra love and care and support. And then locally here in Wisconsin, we had our friend Vanessa Rose on the podcast, who is opening up Mothers here in Milwaukee, a queer LGBTQ third space bar, restaurant, event venue. And she is going through the process of getting the license from the Milwaukee Common Council. And there have been a couple community members from Bayview who have submitted public comments in opposition to Mothers, and it's completely rooted in prejudice and homophobia. And so Mothers, Vanessa and her team have put the call out on social media and out to the community to take action, to write in and voice our support of Mothers to all of the Common Council members. And so we'll link that in the show notes, but I just want to make sure that Mothers is able to open in their fullest capacity, which includes being able to be a performance venue, having that be a beautiful space for drag artists who are so under attack right now to showcase their art, and for any queer performer that wants to showcase their art. So universal shout out to Mothers.
My universal shout out is personal. My Gemini bestie just had a Gemini. And it was honestly so funny because like her mom is also a Gemini. So the Gemini legacy is continuous. And I also just have so much respect for anybody who gives birth. Like it's so challenging. And I saw a lot of the ways in which birth was treated in like hospitals, and a lot of modern medicine really treats birth in a way that feels very medicalized. That's a whole thing that I won't go into. But again, just respect for mothers and people who give birth and anyone who has that capacity to bring a child into the earth. It's amazing. It's beautiful. And shout out to the Geminis, more Geminis.
I just want to also shout out that yesterday was Juneteenth, June 19th, and all of our struggles are connected, and it's really important to remember all the people that resisted the horrendous, um, racist, violent, genocidal act of slavery, and also everything that came beyond it and the resistance that continues to this day. So I just want a universal shout out to all of those people in those networks and communities and cultures. Because it's a huge part of who all of us are, because this land was so deeply impacted by all of those people. So happy Juneteenth. Does anyone else have any other shout outs that they want to share? No. Okay. We could just take another deep breath in together. And a deep breath out. All the way out. All right, Aryn, would you do our story for today?
Yes. So we are talking about A Bug's Life, which is a movie that came out in the early 2000s, I believe. I definitely grew up watching this
I
movie,
think
so
it's
I'm excited.
98. 98.
98? Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay, yes. So I think my fourth or fifth year birthday party was themed Bug's Life. So this is like full circle for me right now. All right. Once upon a time, in the land beneath our feet, there was a colony of ants. Like any other colony of ants, marching in perfect lines, harvesting grain from sunrise to sunset. And every summer they gathered food, but not for themselves, but for the grasshoppers who showed up to take it. Each ant knew their place. They come, they eat, they leave. That's our lot in life, the queen said. It's not a lot, but it's our life. And then there was Flick. Flick was an inventor. He had wild ideas, some of them brilliant, some of them less so. We never have time to collect food for ourselves because we spend all summer collecting it for them, he said, bumbling forward with his newest invention, a multi-grain harvester. Nobody believed in Flick, except Dot, the tiniest princess ant who hadn't quite grown into her wings yet. He taught her about the seed, how everything that made their giant tree was already contained in something so small. And, as expected, Flick's latest invention backfired. Literally, he knocked over the entire food offering, and when the grasshoppers came to check on the ants' progress, they were furious. The sun grows the food, the ants pick the food, the grasshoppers eat the food, said Hopper, the captain of the grasshopper militia. The colony was terrified. If they had to spend the rest of the summer recollecting food for the grasshoppers, they'd have no time to gather anything for themselves. They blamed Flick. They put him on trial. Flick racked his brain. There had to be a way to fix this. There had to be a way to protect the colony. Then a light bulb went off. What if we found bigger bugs to help us fight back? The elders, eager to get him out of the way, agreed and let him go. So Flick set off alone, riding a floating dandelion into the unknown. For the colony and for oppressed ants everywhere, he stumbled into a raucous, bug-sized city and wandered into a bar full of misfit insects. They had just been fired from the flea circus. Outcasts, too. A tough ladybug who got misgendered daily. A sweet spider who tamed beetles. Twin slapstick roly-polies. A psychic praying mantis and his glamorous moth assistant. And a frustrated walking stick who was always cast as a broom. In the chaos of a bar fight, Flick mistook them for warriors, so he asked them for help. Thinking Flick was a talent scout offering them a gig, they said yes. Back at the colony, everybody was shocked. Flick had actually done it. He brought help. The circus bugs leaned into their roles, but when the colony honored them with a theatrical reenactment of their own demise, reality set in. This wasn't a show, it was real. They tried to back away. They weren't going to become grasshopper food. Flick panicked. He chased them through the woods, begging them to stay. And then chaos. A real bird attacked. In the mayhem, Flick had another idea. They would build a Trojan bird, an enormous decoy made of sticks and leaves, something that could scare Hopper and the grasshoppers away for good. Everybody rallied. The ants, the circus bugs, the misfits, all of them worked together to build it before the grasshoppers returned at the end of the season. But when the leader of the flea circus arrived to rehire his crew, everything unraveled. The bugs were exposed as performers, the colony was furious, and Flick left ashamed. The grasshoppers arrived as expected, louder, meaner, hungrier than ever. You let one ant stand up to us, and they all might stand up to us. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. During the chaos, Dot, now braver, wings stronger, overheard Hopper plotting to kill the queen. She ran after Flick. She reminded him of the seed. You're just not a tree yet. Something cracked open. Flick returned with Dot to the colony. They launched the decoy bird. It almost worked. But Hopper discovered the trick. He ordered Flick to get back in line. And for the first time, someone said no. No. The colony rallied. The ants, led by Dot, fought back. They swarmed. They protected each other. They remembered that they were many, not few. As the grasshoppers fled, Hopper chased Flick, who led him directly into the path of a real bird. Believing it to be another fake, Hopper stood his ground and was eaten. The grasshoppers scattered. The ants kept their harvest. Something shifted. The circus bugs stayed. Dot learned to fly. Flick was finally seen. The old order dissolved and something new began. I bet y'all are in the audience being like, is this about us? Because that's how I was feeling. We're going to talk more about our story connection. We're going to weave that in with all of our talk on like astrology and tarot, but I want to hand it over to Dani, who's going to introduce our tarot connection.
Thanks, Aryn. Ooh, I love that story. Such a good one. I just want to say that with the tarot card, I always just pick the tarot card. And this time we did our pre-meeting and it's Gemini season. Gemini moves quick. And I just had the impulse. I was like, we're pulling the card right now. And it came up and it was the Knight of Swords. So let's pull up the Knight of Swords image. Okay, so our tarot connection for today is the Knight of Swords, which we've had two knights on our podcast in the past. And I always think of the knights as movement and our relationship to it. On the right-hand side, if you're looking at it, on the right-hand side is the Knight of Swords from the Smith Rider-Waite tarot deck, which is one of the many tarot decks that that a lot of other tarot decks are based off of. And it's the one that I primarily use. And in the Smith Rider-Waite version, the knights, some of them are actively in movement. Aryn pointed out in our last knight card, the Knight of Pentacles, some of them are still. In this one, you can see this knight is very quickly moving forward. And the Knight of Swords is the knight of the sword element or suit. And the sword element represents air, which has to do with the mind, thinking, stories that we tell, relational. It can be somewhat relational. In astrology, air is definitely relational. In tarot, it shares that with the cups. But it can have to do with kind of the shared narratives that we have and things like that. The Knight of Swords is quick, decisive movement. It's not rushing because a sword has the ability to cut through the mess. So there's some strategy, there's some intention to movement, but it is quick. It is swift. It's the ability to pivot. We can't control everything external, but we can pivot. We can shift gears. We can redirect our energy and we can still move forward swiftly. Lindsay Mack, who's one of my main tarot teacher, I would say, has the Soul Tarot method. And she says that the Knight of Swords is like wind, meaning that it's not that we're getting blown around, but we're letting the wind inform our direction and we're easily moving through and changing directions. So this is really relevant to Gemini season because knights in their movement oriented activity, I always associate with mutable signs, which we'll talk more about what that means in a minute. But mutable signs move us from one season to the next. And the knight is that mutable energy. And swords is the air element, so mutable air. And Gemini is the mutable air sign of astrology. So it's kind of perfect. Of course, it jumped out immediately. It was like, I want to be talked about And I really appreciate that. That means that it is ruled by Mercury in Gemini and also the North Node in Gemini. And I will say that we'll talk a little more about what Mercury means later in astrology, but with this night, I feel like it brings about like our world moves at a mercurial pace. It moves really quickly. Mercury goes around the sun really quickly, and especially with like tech communication. I mean, do you guys remember when we didn't have a world with AI? It wasn't that long ago. It was literally like less than a year ago that we didn't have AI everywhere, you know? So it's like we are going so quick. And also, when that happens, and the more we speed up, our human bodies, like we can have delays. Like the reality of nature is that we're going to be told to slow down. That's why we have Mercury retrograde, which we can talk about later as well. We didn't have that this season. Thank goodness. Mercury was moving very quick this season. But delays and reroutes can feel really personal. And the night can show us how we can move with that movement. That's part of mastering the air element is to move with that movement, not necessarily against it, especially when Mercury retrograde will come around in July. And I do want to also say that with it being the night of air, air is has to do with the mind, mental agility, speed, with it being a night. So quick thinking and also sharp discernment, processing information quickly, synthesizing on the go. Also having the ability to cut through false dichotomies, like we're talking about this or that, challenging duality. It's very clever. It can think quickly, sidestep obstacles. Like there's a lot of ability to change strategy quickly if we need to. It could also, though, because of how fast it is, lead to burnout if not channeled appropriately. And with Gemini, we're going to be talking a lot about how it is the ruler of like networks and building networks. And I just want to say that where different ideas that seem separate, that seem different from each other, come together, and people and like like paradigms that really, don't always fit in when they come together. That's like queer chosen family, like that's like you can be yourself here. And so Gemini really does have a lot to do with kind of pushing against binaries, understanding and pushing against binaries in order to create something that's more expansive than just the relationship between two things. I want to ask Aryn what they think about my fellow tarot reader for a long time. Aryn, do you want to share what you think about the Knight of Swords?
Yeah, I feel like I really associate knights with this idea of courage. I mean, I think just yeah, even the symbolic association with the knights is like they were like warriors and they would go out and they would like fight for their queen or whatnot or protect. And so I think in the context of swords and air and our mental processes and how we talk and express, to me, the Knight of Swords is an encouragement of like speak up, don't overthink it so much. Let it just kind of come out. And I also think there's a message of sometimes it can be very challenging to do that in the context of speaking out against injustice. When you're speaking out but there's a system that thrives off that, that takes courage and can be challenging. But also it can be unpopular to share the truth and to be a truth teller. Oftentimes people who are telling the truth, especially if they're telling the truth about their own experience or they're coming from a perspective of like they have a marginalized identity or experience, it can be so challenging. And so I really feel like the Knight of Swords says, do it anyway. It's going to be hard, do it anyway. And truth telling has a tendency of having a domino effect. Once one person starts to speak up and share their truth, it suddenly becomes a lot easier for people following it to do. That feels really poignant in this moment as well. And I also think too, there's something to be said about like harnessing this collective energy of, in addition to speaking out, in addition to talking about the ways in which things aren't working, there's also space to talk about new possibilities, right? Like we need both the energy of speaking out and sharing and unpacking what already exists. But then we also need people to put forth new ideas, new perspectives. Those two energies together of destruction and creation, I think are really beneficial. So again, I feel like if we're going to construct a new reality, we need the courage of the Knight of Swords. So that's what
And
I'm thinking about.
courage is also confidence too, like
Yeah.
there's like a element of like you have the Knight of Swords backing you. Like if you think about it, like you have the Knight of Swords literally backing you to like make you feel confident that like even if you do say something not imperfectly or something like that, like there's always a way to move, to be better, to do better, to like still continue to move forward, So like there's an element of like having the confidence to be able to like make a mistake if you need to. And part of that confidence, in my opinion, is like who else do you have around you? Like what, your networks and like the resources that you have and like the love, Emily's first quote about from James Baldwin, like the love that you have around you, like also helps you to be able to move like the wind and move with the wind, like there's an adaptability to circumstances because again, we can't control everything. We can't control everyone's reactions to what we say. We can't control that, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't speak the truth, Any
I
other
think
thoughts about that? Yeah.
I would love to just weave in the herbal connection because I have so many threads I want to pull on. And right, Aryn, you were talking about the courage to speak the truth, the courage to speak and share our stories. And it really has me thinking of, yeah, people speaking out against injustices and like personal stories of them experiencing these injustices on the microcosmic personal level. And I feel like, okay, I'm really thinking about the nervous system here. Like when we experience like fear, when we experience some of these like very overwhelming emotions, like that is like processed through the nervous system. And so it feels like when we need to be courageous, it's like our nervous systems might be a little rattled. They might be a little bit like on the fritz. And like it's a lot of like nervous system like healing and support and like co-regulating with other humans, co-regulating with other people, being in community and feeling that support. And then we can also co-regulate with the earth and co-regulate with our plant allies. And I think lavender is a perfect ally for soothing the nervous system. And I really do relate Mercury as having rulership over the nervous system, and particularly Gemini. And I love the nervous system. We have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. We have the peripheral nervous system, which is all the nerves that go out into our limbs and our organs. And then we have the enteric nervous system, which is completely independent of the central nervous system. That's in the nervous system in the gut. And so I associate Virgo as the enteric nervous system, that nervous system in the gut, and I associate the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system with Gemini. So lavender is a support for all of these systems. So lavender is this beautiful perennial flowering plant. We have the image here, these beautiful purple flowers. I feel like most people know lavender. It is like that's also very mercurial, very Gemini. The way that lavender has been dispersed and shared across cultures, across continents, across physical places, like that it's so widespread. Like lavender is like we know lavender fragrance, like you can like and it has such an ancient history too. Like there's records dating back to how the ancient Egyptians worked with lavender like 2500 years ago, and then how the ancient Greco-Romans, right? Like so much of their culture was adopted and adapted from Egyptian culture. And so this is a really beloved and widely recognized plant. And just even the scent of their flowers is very airy, very Gemini. Like you walk past a lavender bush and like that scent hits you immediately. And it's like floating on the air, and like you breathe it in through your nose, and it just like immediately has the nervous system. It immediately has a reaction on the nervous system, and the nervous system relaxes. It soothes. So, like anything that is agitated, dysregulated, right? Like when we might be summoning up the courage to do something, to say something, lavender can be an ally to just give us a sigh of relief, to ground in our bodies, and to soothe our nervous system so that we can feel grounded in our courage to speak the truth and speak our truths. And so I just wanted to share a message from my beloved Herbal Astrology Oracle deck. There is a lavender card in that deck. And so Adriana A. Ellis wrote that lavender is much like the medicine of spider, a master communicator that organizes, refines, and systematizes many elements in life. Connect to the energy of the spiral to journey deep into your shadows and allow this self organizing system to facilitate higher alignment to your foundation when needed. Use the gifts of communication, such as music, poetry, art, and dance, to nurture creativity as you weave your life. Also, just thinking about all the different airy ways that the truth can be spoken through song, through poetry, right? Like through all of those things. So, thank you, Lavender.
Thank you, Lavender. I love when you were talking about how when lavender, like everyone can smell it and everyone knows it. And that's so Gemini coded. It's so true. Love Gemini. Love a Gemini. So we're going to talk a little bit now about Gemini in general and what that means when we talk about Gemini season. Each sign, there's 12 in the zodiacal system we use. Each sign has some defining characteristics. And when we talk about what a season is, we're talking about where the sun is. So the sun has been in Gemini. It's in Gemini around the same time every year. It always moves us from spring into summer. So the defining characteristics of each sign, you've got the modality, which for Gemini is mutable. Mutable modality, what modality means is how does it move the elemental energy that it has. There are 4 elements: air, fire, water, and earth. Okay. And there are 3 modalities. So each modality is going to say how that fire, earth, air, water energy is moved by that sign. So each sign has a unique combination of a modality and an element. And for Gemini, it is mutable air. Okay. And mutable signs are moving. They are mutable. They move the element back and forth. That's in contrast to a cardinal sign, which is very initiatory and starts energy. It's like the beginning of a season. And then you have a fixed sign, which stabilizes a season. Mutable energy takes us from one season to the next. And for Gemini, it's spring to summer. Air energy is the mind, the intellect, our communication, and also in astrology, our relational aspect. How do we relate with the outside world? The other piece, besides modality and elements that we think about with, and one of the biggest pieces that we think about with a sign is its rulership. What planet rules that sign? And that planet for Gemini is Mercury. So Mercury, Emily was just talking a little bit about her take on Mercury, but a few keywords I'll just go over and then we'll talk more about it as each of us gives our takes on Gemini. Mercury is the messenger god, a trickster god. It's the magician in the zodiac, a queer icon, traverser of realms, and non-binary. It's a liminal space one. So again, mutable, air sign, ruled by Mercury, and right on the edge of spring and summer is the sun in Gemini. So who wants to go first with their take on Gemini?
Yay. Oh my gosh. Thank you for giving us the building blocks. Yeah, that's literally like, we just want to make sure that like our listeners, our community are understanding like Astrology is a complex language. It's a complex, like, wisdom tradition, meaning making system. So I appreciate Dani breaking it down kind of piece by piece. So then you can kind of start to put those together. So I would love to just start us off with the image, because I am really rooting my relationship with astrology into my relationship with the earth from like an ecological herbalist gardener perspective. And I'm always thinking about, how do I see these archetypes showing up in the physical earth and in my relationship with the earth. And so my favorite thing to do is, like Dani touched on, the seasonality of Gemini. One, Gemini begins at the end of May and brings us to the summer solstice. And like, I think building an embodied relationship with these signs, notice the environment, notice the weather patterns, notice what the earth is doing. In Taurus season, we have this rebirth, this flowering. There are all of these flowers that are being bloomed, and flowers are the reproductive organs of the plants. That's very Taurian, very Venusian. And then we get into Gemini season, and here come all the pollinators. Here come the bumblebees. I've been seeing my first monarchs during Gemini season. My, like, truly, like, one of my most beloved beings that I just light up every time I see a monarch. Even the birds are pollinators, the dragonflies, the little insects, like all of these beings, like, they are so Mercurial and Gemini in nature because they fly, right? They are of the air element because they move through the world through flying. They have wings and they are carried by the wind. And then to feed themselves, to nourish themselves, like, their pivotal role in the ecosystem, their relationship is to consume the nectar of the flower, which is, again, very Venusian, very Taurian. Like, it's like a come hither, like, I am seducing you with my sweet nectar. And then here are these very Gemini little, like, delightful bumblebees that are like, I'm hungry. Let's go out. Let's leave the hive. I need to get food for myself and my colony and for the queen. Let me see what I can find. And buzzes around and is like attracted. It's like, ooh, look at this little pretty flower. And ooh, now look at this one. Maybe I'll take a nap in this one and recharge, and like, oop, off to find another flower. And just this, like, buzz, 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 buzz. Like, just so, like, just there's just, like, delight and, like, attraction. They're being attracted by the Venusian quality of the plant, and then they're getting food, they're getting sustenance. It's a reciprocal relationship. And then what they do for the ecosystem, which is so Gemini, they're picking up the flower's pollen. And then when they move from flower to flower, they're literally dispersing and distributing one flower's pollen to another flower. And that is how, like, that is literally like how plants reproduce. And so just that vision, that image of the pollinator, the butterfly, the bee, I really like to think of the bumblebee, and like, they're networked too. They have a whole hive that they are a part of. So bumblebees to me are like such a Gemini, like, just example in the natural world. So Dani or Aryn, what do you think?
I love that. I literally saw a monarch butterfly near a lavender plant the other day. So what you were saying was like literally the Gemini symbology. I really think of Gemini as, I really do think about the ways that Geminis are perceived, and the way that I think in pop sun sign astrology, there's a tendency to almost like, okay, this is like a thought that I've been kind of working on that I'd like your choose take on. It almost feels like a lot of what we think about signs are connected to sun sign interpretations. And so in that flattening, we lose out on the process of creating essentialism with certain signs, because in order to have a language, we need to have some sort of agreed, like, connotations, right? But then what can come from there can really fluctuate, and there can be a lot of flexibility, and that also feels very Gemini. So I feel like there's a lot of Gemini hate, and I feel like it I understand it because I think in some ways it reveals the way that we're uncomfortable with flux. A lot of the times people are like Geminis are two-faced, they're multi-faced. I don't know how to trust them. In a culture that is obsessed with like almost reducing people to one sort of quality or almost wanting people to be flat or not dynamic, of course that's uncomfortable. One of my Gemini besties, she's so funny. I have this quote on my phone where she says, Geminis aren't like trying to deceive you. Like we're sincerely two-faced. Like they can wear many different faces. And I think part of their job is a reflection. And so I'm really interested in this idea of Gemini's manifestation of Mercury, almost where people are associating that sort of flux with deceit. And it can be, right? Like it can be, but it's kind of like the same kind of logic of being like drag queens are deceiving us. No, they're not. They're very much being like, we are putting this on and it's like it's playful, it's fun. I think a lot about like the twin symbology. Sometimes you even see the this is like a theater image, but the two masks and like one's happy and one is sad, like happy sad, that vibe where it's like sometimes what one thing is actually two things. I feel like this is all kind of theoretical and challenging to talk about, but I think a lot about that. Gemini does feels like this energy of unpacking the binary, unpacking of the ways that we take a lot of our perspectives of the world for granted. Gemini is very much the first to be like, well, what about this? Or what about this? Like that curiosity, that desire to take a bunch of different information and like kind of figure out how it flows all together. That also reminds me of the pollinator imagery that you're talking about, Emily, where it's kind of like whimsical. It's kind of like I do this because I want to, and oh, these are connected because I'm moving from different places. So yeah, I just want to say that if you have some Gemini feelings, or if Gemini is an evocative energy to you, I would encourage you to think about what is it reflecting back to you,
Yes,
and also
literally
where's
what I
Gemini
wanted to say.
yeah.
The reflecting piece, because like the lovers is the Gemini card in the tarot is the lovers card, which is all about like how you're being reflected. And to me, a lot of that, most activation by other people, depending on what it's about, has to do with how you are being reflected or the role you're being asked to play, like in a dynamic of some kind. So yes, I agree 100% with that.
Just want to chime in on the reflection. So I have a Gemini moon. So like this reflection, and I even just want to weave in a little story. Like Danny and I like have this like we're like our charts, like just how Danny and I even met is very like cosmologically kind of like orchestrated or aligned, as above, so below. But last Gemini season, Danny and I were hanging out and sitting on my front stoop, and Danny was like serving as a mirror. Like there was something internal, like having a Gemini moon where it was like I was kind of in a depression and I couldn't really place my finger on why. And then in a conversation with Danny, she served as the mirror that I needed to tap into the own meaning of my emotions and my own internal experience. And it was related to queerness, which is also super mercurial. And Danny just told me a story and was just like, it was related to queerness. And it just like that beautiful mirror that a friend can serve, that a meaningful conversation can be that reflection. It's like, oh, and I saw myself and my own internal struggle in Danny's experience and her sharing it with me through storytelling and through conversation. And I just feel like that's how I experience my Gemini moon. Sometimes I don't really know, like, I need other people to reflect back to me to be like, oh, that's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm experiencing.
I also have my Venus in Gemini, and it's pretty close to Emily's moon. And Venus's symbol is the hand mirror. So, literally a reflection. Aryn, I feel like I interrupted you while you were finishing your thought. Do you have anything else you want to add about that?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I can I talk about the connection with Sag? Yeah, I feel like, well, because I don't have any Gemini in my charts. It is my sixth house, and I have a lot of Gemini people or people with Gemini placements. And I think part of it is because I have Sagittarius placements. So I have Venus and Jupiter and Sag, they're conjunct. And so every time I have Gemini friends. I'm like, what is my Sag planets doing with yours? And I do feel like Gemini and Sag together, they're kind of the clowns of the zodiac. Like they're like very silly and they're playful and they're dynamic. And so I feel like that's part of maybe why I really vibe with Gemini despite not having any placements of my own, because I do feel like them together, it's very much like it feels like a party. It feels like Jupiter and Mercury. Okay. So it's like those two planets are gassing each other up. I feel like, I guess, well, I'll start with how they're similar and maybe like y'all can talk about how they're different. But to me, they both feel like so curious. They want to know things, they want to explore. That might manifest in different ways. And I feel like, though, both of them are really good at kind of just like absorbing and reflecting. And Sag is like through fire and Gemini's through air, but there's this sense of like I need to get gritty with how I like experience this. I don't know. Experiential is coming up to me. That might be more Sag coded than Gemini, but it still does feel like both of
Well,
them
it's
are
more like
just,
fire air experience though,
yeah,
like Gemini
yeah,
is interested in experience, but it's more like they're interested in gathering information and like they're an air sign. So it's like mental versus like a fire sign is like, I'm living it. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that kind of an
like
energy.
more embodied.
Yeah. And like more like
Regardless,
dramatic maybe. Like I would definitely say Sag is way more dramatic than Gemini. I Although Gemini obviously, like, has its dramatic side, like, because it's kind of everything.
either way, both of these signs have 10 million tabs open and all of them are important. And I think there's something fun about rabbit holes of information. And also, I feel like Gemini and Sag are really good energies where you literally like, those are the two signs where you could connect with anyone. For you to find something to connect with. Like my Gemini besties are always chatting up strangers, always getting in these like weirdly philosophical, like deep conversations, and I feel like Sag can be kind of the same way, where Sag is able to be like, well, there's philosophy in everything.
Mhm.
There's things like microcosms that represent the bigger picture. And so I feel like both of those signs kind of have that yapping energy.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think before this, we were like, Sag is the big picture. It's like, what is the meaning of the universe, right? Like, and then Gemini is like, okay, we have the big picture, and then it gets distilled and fractalized into all these little details or little fractals that are little universes within themselves that make up the larger universe. Like, okay, to get super philosophical with it, like if we think about source, right? Whatever that higher power is, and it's like, I do really believe that the like driving force of that like creator is to create, and it's like to see themselves in infinite expressions. And so that's the big picture, that's Sag. And then the infinite expressions and individual fractals are Gemini that like weave it all. And then that, right? Like, so it's like Gemini being the weaver, weaving up the little pieces that make up the Sag giant web.
Well, and I also think, like, because I think of Gemini as like relational in terms of like I think of the zodiac as kind of story, right? And so you have the Aries is like, here I am, world, birth, I'm like born, I'm in the world. And like a baby is like to 2 years old, and then like 2 to 5, where you're like tending to your life and you're growing and you're going through growing pains but it's still like all about you and your needs and like tending to the resources and building up your stuff. And then Gemini is like when you literally like go out into the world for the first time, you go to school, you start yapping with a bunch of different people, you're building like relationships, all these micro relationships that end up becoming a network. And to me, Sag is honestly like more like the beliefs and paradigms and like shared experiences of those networks, you know what I'm saying? And because Sag is arrow pointed to the center of the universe, even though it's mutable, there's still an element of like there can be dogmatism with Sagittarius because the big picture is so important. It's got that fire, dedication, like stuff like that going on, even though it like might change its big picture. You know what I mean? It's like I am an artist. I'm going to be an artist. I've talked about this in our Sag episode. I'm like, all the Sages I know are like, I am a, visual artist and I will always be a visual artist. And then they're like, I'm a musician. I'm done with art forever. You know what I mean? Like, this is my thing now. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's like that. So there is movement, but like, it definitely is like, there's a commitment. Whereas like Gemini keeps it a little more like, not, it can be lighthearted. Not that Geminis can't go deep, like they do, they totally can, but like it can be a little bit like lighter hearted. It can be friendlier. It can be a little more, like I said, like
101.
yeah, and like time for like multiple connections because again, those connections, those individual relationships, all that work that Gemini does, that Mercury does, communicating, traversing all the realms, like eventually creates this bigger network, which is what, Sag believes in and kind of represents.
I just thought of an analogy. So, like social justice movements, any people powered movement, like Gemini being those interpersonal relationships that bring people together, and Sagittarius being the big picture. What are we fighting for together? What do we
Mhm.
believe in together? Right? Like, because Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, is like the imaginative, like the imaginal realms, and being able to believe in something that is not tangibly here yet. And then
Totally.
Gemini is like, that's what's bringing us together. And then it's like through these interpersonal relationships, we are working together. We are like coming together to network to like bring these visions to life.
I want to jump into talking a little bit about Mercury because Mercury rules over Gemini and Mercury is the closest to the sun. And it's interesting because Jupiter rules Sagittarius. You just talked about how that kind of plays a part. And Mercury's like has like an opposite feeling to Jupiter because Jupiter is the biggest planet and Mercury's the smallest planet. And so there's this, and it's the closest to the sun. So it's the one that's like going the quickest. And this season, Mercury moved a bunch of times, like through three different signs. So we'll talk more about that when we go through the astro transits. But just to say that, like, there's this Mercury Jupiter relationship, and also with the other signs that Mercury and Jupiter rule, which are Virgo and Pisces, there's also that relationship. So Mercury and Jupiter kind of have this also an oppositional axis relationship, and Mercury moves quicker. It's the the swiftly moving planet, and it also does have to do with like individual messages. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like here's the message here, here's the message here, and if Jupiter is those big philosophical ideas, that all those little messages end up making up. I think that's really interesting too.
That made me think, Danny, of this sort of concept too of Mercury as messenger, literally being the closest planet to the sun. So Mercury is like a translator. And that's what's so interesting too when you get into like natal charts is that Mercury is never that far away from the sun. And so like if somebody introduces themselves as a Capricorn sun, like in my astro brain, I'm like, okay, there's only like possibly like three possibilities of signs Mercury can be in. And I sometimes think I feel like if we're gonna talk about the sun, like we have to talk about Mercury because Mercury is literally like the energy of like our voice, our perspective, our mental processes. And the sun, I feel like it needs that translation, that
It's the
transmutation.
microphone up to the
Yes,
sun. What do you
exactly.
got to say,
Exactly.
sun? Or
We need to make a
anybody?
meme holding a microphone up to the baby sun in Teletubbies.
Yeah. What do you gotta say, son? What do you gotta say? Like Mercury, I mean, I love Mercury and her like Hermes, like the archetype of Hermes. Like Hermes has winged feet and, is flitting about all over the place and like really is a challenger of binaries. Hermes even has some etymological connection to a word I won't use because it's been used in super violent ways since then, but it ultimately does have connection to like being a traverser of realms and existing sort of like in liminal space or being able to exist in a liminal space, representing a liminal space. There's no coincidence, in my opinion, that it happens. Gemini season is like around is you know what I mean? Like of course it's associated with queerness and with being trans and being like non-binary and, challenging those things. My Venus is in Gemini. Like that's a huge marking of bisexuality. It's like, the twins, like my Venus is there, like, of course, So I remember once I had two like huge crushes, like on people, very different genders. And like, each of them were super different people, but they both had J names. And I was just like, this is my perfect thing I could ever imagine. I love it. Like, it's so great. So yeah, I just want to throw that in there too, that like Mercury being the traverser of realms, being able to hold duality, Hermes, the messenger god who could go from heaven to hell and back again. There's literal like queer magic there, in that like fluidity, sacred third thing energy that Mercury has.
The last thing I want to weave in for Mercury is really highlighting the mystical side of Mercury. This is Danny mentioned that in the tarot, Mercury corresponds with the Magician card. And the Magician is the first card of the major arcana. And it's really like, I think Mercury is also Mercury and Hermes. They are the patron god of astrology, which is a meaning making mystical system rooted in the hermetic principle, because there's also, we could get into, there's this whole like esoteric kind of like philosophy called hermeticism, which is rooted in this mysterious figure Hermes, Trig, I'm gonna say it wrong, but their last name is like Trig Mist something. Sorry to all the occult practitioners, I'm totally butchering that. Mercury, Hermes, is the patron of astrology, and like literally anyone who is on this kind of mystical occult path of like working with these mystical esoteric arts and sciences, alchemy, that's all Mercury. And so like just this as above so below principle that is core to hermeticism and is also core to our kind of Western astrological beliefs, like as that's what we're talking about, this as above in the cosmos, in the universe, as below here on earth in our lived experience. And so there's that like Mercury is that bridge. Mercury is the psychopomp. Mercury is the one, like Danny said, traversing all the realms and being the communicator, the translator of what's happening in the heavens, what's happening in earth, and what's happening in the underworld. And that is magic. That is mysticism. And so I just like with Mercury, I always want to, I love Mercury. Just there's a lot of magic and mysticism with them.
Totally. And all of it kind of boils down to like the micro movements, the individual choices, the relationships, the pollinator going from this to that flower. Like each of those things is what builds a network, something bigger, and that becomes its own entity that is bigger than the sum of those parts, So I just think that's really cool that that thread is kind of being woven through. Do we have anything we want to say about the archetypal stuff or like just about Gemini in general, Mercury in general? Or do we want to move on to our current event transits? Emily, do you want to pull up the Sag full moon chart? Maybe while Emily's pulling that up, I will talk a little bit, just kind of intro this piece of it. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of different transits. We have several of them on here, like the biggest ones that listed on the right. But we're just going to kind of group them together to talk through how they might be impacting us in our world. So, first of all, we like to talk about Mercury. We like to talk about the ruling planet of the season. So, again, Gemini season is the sun in Gemini, and the planet that rules Gemini is Mercury. So, we're going to talk about Mercury and where Mercury has been, which, like I said, has been moving real quick through all three Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer this season. And then we're going to talk about the lunar transits. So the new and full moons in Gemini, the new moon in Gemini on Memorial Day, and the full moon, the strawberry moon in Sagittarius on June 11th. And then we're going to talk through the big picture transit. So there's several bigger outer planets. These are the planets Saturn and beyond, and Jupiter. Jupiter too is a kind of in the middle. It's both personal and kind of outer. but all of these kind of bigger, heavy hitting planets that take longer to go around the sun. So we're with them for a longer period of time. And they also can kind of represent the, bigger picture things, the collective things going on. We're going to talk, there's several movements of those things over the last month or two, some in Gemini season, and there's also some standoffs that were happening between a couple of them. So we're going to touch on those bigger picture transits and how they impacted us today. So I want to turn it over to Emily to kind of maybe start with the bigger picture transits.
Yeah. I'll start with the bigger picture and then bring it into the chart that we're looking at here, which is the full moon, which really on a felt level, we really I invite people to reflect on what was happening in your life on June 11th. So and a full moon is always, it's like 2.5 days. So this is a felt experience of a so I would invite you to think about like what Tuesday, June 10th to Thursday, June 12th, what that felt like for you, what was coming up in your life, because this is really like a really big swelling and culmination. And that's what full moons are. And then kind of being amplified as these bigger outer transits. So, one of in case you didn't hear, because I feel like I was in Europe when Saturn moved into Aries, and I was like on Instagram, and it was like when a big thing happens in astrology, like when an outer planet changes sign, or our transpersonal planets, Jupiter and Saturn, like your Instagram feed, if you are in those algorithms, everyone's going to have a take and everyone's going to be saying something about it, because it is a big deal when Saturn moves signs. So this happens every 2.5 years. So we have Saturn in Aries. And so this means if you have Saturn in Pisces natally, your Saturn return is winding down. You will get one more pass of Saturn retrograding back into Pisces in September of this year through February of next year. And then it'll be in Saturn. Saturn will move back into Aries for the next 2 years. Basically, right now we're in this preview of Saturn in Aries, which is from May 24th, which was during Gemini season, until September 1st of this year. Saturn is institutions, Saturn is structures, and Aries is the realm. This is where the sun is exalted. And so I just wanted to shout out Ari Felix, one of my favorite astrological teachers. They did this great Instagram live. It's on their Substack. And they were really talking about how Saturn in Aries, which is the sign of Saturn's fall, this is really where Saturn struggles, and it's a very powerful position. And Ari was really saying like this is really representing like the fall of kings. So we had a very interesting event, right? Like during Gemini season, US, president, his birthday is in Gemini season. And if you are in the US like we are, or just, heard about this globally, he kind of had this like dictator-esque, not even esque, like full on dictator, like military birthday celebration. It's just so boggling to me because I was literally in Berlin during Gemini season. I was in Berlin 3 weeks ago, and I was reading at the Typography of Terror. Like there's this outdoor monument, and it's part of the Berlin Wall is still there. And it's all these glass panels, and it's just like almost 2 city blocks long. And it's just detailing out the history of like the rise of Nazism, the rise of Hitler, the rise of fascism, and everything that culminated. And like one of the panels is talking about how Hitler literally had all of these forced birthday celebrations. Like this is not like it's not a joke that Trump is trying to have a military birthday celebration. Like that is literally from the dictator fascist playbook. And we need to know that and name that. And people are feeling that. So Saturn and Aries really aligns right before this kind of dictator military parade. And people are like, no, people know that that is wrong. And so there's kind of this rising up and like this falling of the king, if you will, would be Saturn and Aries. And then there's this like profound tension because we also had Jupiter enter Cancer. We talked a little bit about Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of faith and expansion, generosity, just profound benevolence. And so Jupiter moved into Cancer. Danny, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say that Jupiter also is the king in like mythology, is like the king of Mount Olympus. And when Trump was elected, Jupiter was in Gemini, which comes before Cancer, and was conjunct Trump's sun in Gemini. So I just want to point that out, that Jupiter, being a great benevolent planet that it is, it also can bring abundance to everything. You know what I'm saying? So
Yes.
I want to place that before we start talking about the movement into Cancer.
Yes, Jupiter will expand anything, right? Like Jupiter brings blessings. And yeah, not necessarily, right? Like it's not really like this, it's just
Like it
cosmological.
brought him blessings in that case. You know what I'm saying? Like it brought him power
Right.
in that case. But now it's not in Gemini anymore. You know what I'm saying? Now it's moving into Cancer. So
Yeah.
I want to start there.
Yeah. So Jupiter in Cancer, this is the place of Jupiter's exaltation. Cancer is the sign of the moon. This is, the beginning of the summer solstice is when the sun enters Cancer. And Cancer, being ruled by the moon, is all about nourishment. It's about the tidal waves of our emotions. It's about care, how we care for and nourish our bodies, how we caretake and nourish others. And so when you bring Jupiter in here, Jupiter exalts here because Jupiter ultimately does want everyone to be fed, does want just, I think of like like a dinner party, and there's this like the abundance of summer, all of these fresh vegetables, and you have so much abundance to share. And of course we live in a society, right? Like we live within these capitalist systems that are rooted in like hoarding wealth. And I think ultimately like Jupiter, when expressed through like a decolonial anti-capitalist lens, it's like abundance is to be shared. Like I think what Vanessa said in her interview, she said like in times of plenty you share, right? Like you build longer tables. You don't hoard all that plenty for just one person, right? Like you share that with the community. And so that's what I really envision when Jupiter in Cancer is expressed in a power to the people way. It's like we all get fed, right? Like this is shared. And so we have this tension between people are really like, oh, yes, like we are living, in profound times of wealth inequality. People are not getting fed, like intentionally, specific groups of people are not being fed, are not being given access to resources. And now there's this huge tension between Saturn and Jupiter, and the day that they squared each other was the weekend of the No Kings protest. And so, this No Kings protest was a national protest across the country. It was like very Gemini in nature. It was almost like kind of like a decentralized thing. It was like, okay, the central organizing principle is no more kings. We do not want dictators. We do not want kings, right? And then there's like a Gemini decentralization of like organizers in cities and towns across the US are organizing and coming together and building a network to come out and resist together. And each place that one of these protests take place in are going to look different and going to have their own unique expressions, their unique stories, their unique perspectives, right? Like, so that No Kings protest, I think, really is like showing, okay, here's this like ruler, this king that is trying to prop himself up, literally as a Führer, like just like Hitler. And then people coming together and being like, no more kings. Power to the people, no more kings. And so there's this tension. And then the full moon in Sagittarius, which you can see in this chart, was literally like days, like the week leading into this weekend of protests. And so think about like the emotions that people had, like just feeling into like the truly felt individual and collective experiences of what's happening, and that emotion like fueling them to show up and to protest.
Well, and also during that time was all of the we started to see people resisting ICE like around the country. And people have been doing that, but like it like when the stuff in LA started to come up was like right before the No Kings stuff. I think it's, it's there's a reason that the state is targeting these communities specifically. There's a reason that they're going after immigrants. And a big piece of that is that a lot of those people that they're going after are from places that have a history of resistance, being well networked, well organized, and have like a history of mutual aid. So there's like there's a lot of, Emily talked earlier about like the Sagittarius Gemini axis being about like movements where you have like the Gemini micro relationships and then the Sagittarius like larger paradigm and beliefs and stuff. Like a lot of the, in the United States too, like a lot of specifically communities like immigrant communities like from Latin America, but also other places are more community oriented than people might expect and are pretty well organized. And like have a ton of, collective resources because they've had to create these networks. And like, that is a threat to the power structure because they know how, like, Hopper says in A Bug's Life, he says, there's 100 of they outnumber us 100 to 1. If they ever figure that out, like we're screwed, and that's kind of like the energy right now where it's like there is a knowledge in some of these communities of that power and resources already built, communities, networks already created, micro relationships that already are solidified. And so they are going after that. That is why they're separating people. That is why they're taking people from their homes. They are trying to go after the foundation of these communities because they're well organized and that is a threat to them taking advantage of us and doing whatever that they want. And Emily mentioned Pluto and Aquarius earlier and like how, Aquarius and Gemini, they make a whole sign trine to one another. Pluto and Aquarius has a lot to do with the resistance movements and the empire coming home to roost and going through a reckoning and humanitarian efforts going through a reckoning and making this trine like an easeful relationship to the sun and Gemini, our networks, our communities, all of that kind of stuff. Honestly, Pluto is a power planet. It has to do with wealth. So there's a lot of power, honestly, behind people saying no and moving like the Knight of Swords swiftly, strategically. When a new barrier gets in the way, they find another way to protect people. They keep coming out. The No Kings protests were humongous, and also all the defense that people are doing, community defense that people are doing to protect people from because the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement is not like acting legally in any way, like they're not acting morally correctly in any way, like they're committing crimes against humanity and they're acting in the interests of a very few amount of people that want to like control and own everyone else in their labor, which is super messed up. So, yeah, I just think it's really kind of cool to see how the Sag full moon comes around and everyone's like, this is what I believe in, and I'm coming out and I'm going to be in the streets and defend my community, and I will not comply like in advance. There's no way that I'm going to just out of fear not do everything that I can to say, no, it's not okay to just rip children from their mothers, like through a broken window that you broke. For what? For no reason at all.
There's something about the No Kings thing that feels connected to Saturn and Aries in detriment, right? Like Saturn has is less resourced in Aries. So again, that ties back to this idea that like of even the story connection of, the ant colony being like, well, we have to shift, we have to like be creative with our methodology. And I feel like that story is really pivotal and impactful because it does tell a story of like a few select group who uses brutality and fear to gain, control over a larger group that actually does have the resources. Also, like what you're saying, Danny, of like the intentionality of targeting communities. It also makes me think of like targeting queer communities because, of course, when you're a community that doesn't have access to the traditional modes of survival, you get creative, you start talking to each other. And so it does feel, all of the like fascism is a strategy. All of the like moves that they're making, it's not randomized, it's strategic. But also I'm thinking with Saturn and Aries is that it feels a little bit like this message of like, okay, if there's no kings and there's no heroes, that means we all kind of collectively contain that like spark or that role. And so it does is interesting to also think of Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn and Aries are cardinal signs. So this initiatory process. I do wonder in the next year or so, Jupiter won't be in Cancer for too long, but that starting off with like Saturn and Aries together is really fascinating to me. Cardinal signs start shit. They get stuff done. Follow through, that's a little challenging. But I do feel like right now, at least, we have Venus and Taurus. And so having that fixed energy to channel feels impactful too.
Well, and Aaron, you wanted to talk about Mars and Virgo, and Mars is ruling over this, you know, Aries, the Aries placements, and Mars has been going through a whole bunch of stuff recently. It's been stuck for like 8 months. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So from where we are now, Mars is in Virgo, but you're right, Danny. Like we've had these Mars retrogrades, which retrograde just creates it slows planets down. So even when planets are coming out of it, like it can kind of take some time for the speed to pick up. And so I feel like in general, having this Mars retrograde between Leo and Cancer, I feel like we saw a lot of themes that are connected to what we're talking about. Our personal power and our responsibility, how we act on those things. And again, because it spent so much time, we've really had a longer period of time to sit with this energy for better or worse, like depending on where those things are in your chart. I know like a lot of Virgo risings on my timeline when Mars finally moved into Virgo, they were just like, yes, I'm so sick of having Mars and Leo in my 12th house. So again, it depends on where you are, but I feel very excited about Mars and Virgo. One, because that's my natal placement in my chart. And I feel like Mars and Virgo is like in some ways like kind of underrated. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's not in detriment. It's not at home. It's in that sort of like space where it's just more neutral. But to me, I really connect to Mars and Virgo as action in favor of systemization. Virgo is efficient because they're so systematic, because there's, I was going to say rules, but like guidelines of how to go about certain things. And so, in the context of social justice and collective kind of energy, we really could use Mars and Virgo to kind of like nose to the grindstone. How are we systematizing things? We see the government systematizing, right? In usually negative ways. Are there ways that we can channel that energy into positive? And I also think, what you said earlier, Emily, about the like Mercury nervous system, like Virgo connected to like the nervous system as it's connecting to our stomach. That also is making me think of the Jupiter and Cancer being fed. So there's this like idea of nourishment, and that like if you want to have a healthy gut, you have to be systematic and intentional about what you're eating and paying attention to like, if I put this into my body, what's my body's reaction? And so we do have a little bit of that Mercurial energy in Mars, which feels just to me so powerful, so potent to work with. Really, if we want to like systematize things, not in a way where it's like disconnected from our human experiences. But I don't know, Mars and Virgo just has this kind of ability to like hone in on what's not working. Mars and Virgo is really good at like troubleshooting. Do y'all have anything else that you want to say about that specific transit?
Well, I just saw, I mean, I think like the fact that it's been in Cancer and Leo for since September of last year, like that's almost a full year that it's in just two signs, you know? So I think we really will feel this energy. Like we're gonna feel this transit a lot. And I saw somebody say something about like, well, Virgo, first of all, is a Mercury ruled sign. It's the other one, like next to Gemini. And so like in Virgo's an earth sign, so I think of it as like strategy and like Aryn said, like systematizing something and like with this Gemini like need and Knight of Swords like need to like be like wind, you know, and like Mars is also kind of night energy where it's just like charging forward. It's the warrior, zodiac, all that kind of stuff. Like how do we need to like shift our strategies? Like, where do we fit in the system? Like, what's our role in that system? Like, networks are systems, collectives are systems. Like, there's systems behind all of that. So, like, I think of Mars and Virgo as like figuring out like where we can enact our like energy and like best use our energy and be most efficient with our energy and sustainable with our energy use because not all of us are meant to be on the front lines. That might be way too much burnout for some of us. Like Mars and Virgo, like preventing burnout, huge, like hugely important, I think. So also with Saturn and Aries, like both of that relationship between the two of them, like really important that we are like taking care and doing things sustainably. I think that's the only thing I want to say about that transit.
Do we want to bring in our other chart to maybe start grounding some of these Gemini like archetypes, experiences?
Yeah.
I love how we talk about like how, because I think with astrology, as you're learning it, it's like really helpful to see like in lived experience, right? Like you can view these archetypes and zodiac signs and planets through like world events, through personal individual experiences, and then we can take them to like the birth chart and how that like even influences like a person and like who they are and how they show up in the world and how they experience the world. So we have a chart example which highlights some of these Gemini aspects and how they may appear in someone's life if they are born while there are specific planets in Gemini. Okay. So our chart example for Gemini season is Anthony Bourdain. I just have like such a beloved like feeling towards him, and he is passed now. So rest in power, Anthony Bourdain. So those who maybe aren't familiar with who he is, Anthony Bourdain was a well-known chef, which is, and you can see he had a Cancer sun. And I really connect Cancer and the moon to, again, nourishment, right? So the profession of being a chef and feeding people for a living, nourishing people for a living. And then he is a writer as well. He wrote this book called Kitchen Confidentials, which I very much see in his chart. So I'll just start pointing out some of the things in his chart. Here's his Cancer sun. It's in the 12th house, and the 12th house is like these liminal spaces. And he kind of wrote like maybe what a lot of people who don't work in the service industry and aren't actually like in the kitchens. No, he wrote like about the inner workings, almost in like a, and I have not read the book, so this is only what I've heard. I do need to read the book, but that is kind of like what maybe put him on the map. He's a Leo rising. His ascendant is right here. So his Leo rising is ruled by the sun in Cancer. And then really what propelled Anthony Bourdain into kind of like just the public sphere was after like decades. I think like he did like, over 2 decades of like working in the kitchens as a chef. He was given the opportunity to start these travel food related shows and really became this personality of the host of these shows. And so I think the first show was called A Cook's Tour. And then he did No Reservations on the Travel Channel. And then he did Parts Unknown with, I believe, CNN. And the premise of these shows are Anthony Bourdain traveling the world, very mercurial, experiencing different cultures. And it's very networked, right? Like he would go to these places because he had a relationship with someone from that place. And he would go because of an invitation from that person. I'm starting to watch No Reservations. I think it's on HBO Max. I'm watching season 1. And it's like in season 1, he goes to Vietnam because he has a friend that's a chef there who invites him. And then he travels the country and explores the country through food. That's really right. He's Cancer Sun. He's a chef. That's his lens. But he's exploring the world through his network. So you can see Anthony Bourdain has Mercury in the 11th house at 12 degrees of Gemini, and then also Venus retrograde at 28 degrees of Gemini. So he has Mercury and Venus, right? Like he's a writer, he's a conversationalist, he's a connector, he's a very networked person, and it's in the 11th house of extended networks.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the
Yeah.
11th house is the world, our broader community.
Absolutely. And then Gemini, his art form, right? This love, right? To words, to conversations, to relationships. And so in his shows, he just takes it's like a human to human approach of like not going to these high tourist destinations, but like experiencing and showcasing in his show like a really relational approach and a mercurial approach to connecting with people over food and sharing culture through the relationships that he has. So I just want to see Dani or Aryn, yeah, what thread do you want to pull on?
Uh, I just noticed right away that Pluto and Jupiter are in Leo in the first house, and they're conjunct each other. And I think that's important. Like people that have Pluto in the first house, like tend to reflect really accurately back people back to themselves and can be an activating force. And he definitely had like opinions about things and like I think struggled with some of the fame stuff and some of the ways that things worked in the world. And like Emily was saying, like operating from this very like real down to earth place of like making genuine connections with people and like not wanting to go to places, like parts unknown and like not wanting to go to, the places everyone goes and review the places everyone reviews, but like, give people a chance, like get to the root of things, get to the root of communities. And, I just think that was both a beautiful thing about him and maybe also a piece of the tragedy around him. I just wanted to point that piece of it out. In Leo, being very visible, a very visible person. So Pluto in a very like in Leo and like this visible energy in the first house and like reckoning with that and what that means and the responsibility, all of that.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't know much about Anthony Bourdain, and I've been learning a lot more from Emily's little like excerpt of his life. But just from what y'all have been saying, I just keep looking at that Capricorn moon. I feel like having a Cancer sun, so then the moon is the ruler of his sun, and that moon to be in Capricorn. And also, I'm assuming he was born after a full moon. So his sun is at 3 degrees. So a full moon would be at 3 degrees Capricorn. So he was probably born like a day or two after that. And so that's an interesting thing that I noted. But I wanted to say originally about the Capricorn moon thing. That's another planet that's in detriment. Like Capricorn or the moon somewhat struggles in Capricorn because like the moon like likes to be fickle and expressive. Capricorn is like but structure. And so I feel like, to me, it almost seems like he has like an intimate feeling of like that key thing of nourishment just feels really prevalent here, that perhaps like he's had experiences in his life and almost like a reconciliation where he might have had to sought out or worked on what it means to be nourished, what it means to be resourced, especially emotionally. The body and of like food is our body's like resource and fuel. So for him to be a chef and to be a traveler and to like find the connection between cuisine and culture, but also like there's like a personal sense to it. Like again, like Capricorn and Cancer, that axis, it does feel like caretaking in some ways, or like how do we resource each other? How do we care for each other? And also that experience of like being very protective. Both signs have that sort of reputation of being kind of hard on the outside, but like it's because it's protecting something soft on the inside. So that was just something that stuck out to me.
Further weaving the nourishment thread, the midheaven is in Taurus. So
Ruled by Venus and Gemini, right? So this very much this like nourishment, but through relationships, through networks. I think what I love about Anthony Bourdain is like his approach to travel is like really resonates like within me of like wanting to go and travel and like experience other countries and cities like how a local would and through the lens of a local and like searching out like a relationship that you have um like meeting a local, right? And like asking them for their perspective on their home and their city and what they would recommend. Which just to me that feels so like Gemini, it's like accessible, it's meeting people where they're at. And just like his Mercury in Gemini, able to connect with anybody, right? Like just able to meet anyone where they're at, connect with them. I think he had like a very charming Leo rising, like kind of charming, charismatic presence, a very warm and sunny presence, maybe also very activating. Um, so I just thought he was like, he really showcased some of these like Gemini archetypes through his lived experience. So rest in power, Anthony Bourdain. Shall we transition to weaving in our story connection?
yeah. So the story connection, like the tarot card, for me, the story connection is a result of Google searches of different concepts and stuff and like looking for stories specifically. And this one was just on a list and I was like, oh, this could work. And then I talked to Emily and Aaron and was like, what do you think of The Bug's Life? And they were like, that's one of my favorite movies ever. And so we all decided to do this one. So obviously there's a few things and feel free to jump in you too if you have like specific thoughts about this, but there's a lot of ways that this connects to Gemini season and specifically this Gemini season that we just had. A big part of it, we talk about networks and like, moving collectively. Flick is like a part of this big network that is being ruled over by these like oppressive like tyrants essentially who are just taking advantage of their labor and keeping them using propaganda and fear to keep them believing that they don't have any power over it. And Flick, this character Flick, who is this like really inventive and like tries new things and is kind of all over the place and a little clumsy and like very Gemini coded, like trickster energy, like kind of like, eh, switching gears whenever he needs to, trying something, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, that kind of a thing. Um, and he ends up like having to reckon with his responsibility for the collective. He ends up like doing something accidentally that ends up getting the collective in trouble with these like overlords. And throughout the whole thing, things go wrong and Flick pivots directions. So I also connected to the Knight of Swords archetype because it's like every time something goes wrong, he's like, a new idea, something else, And also Gemini, I kind of feel like Gemini has some like optimistic energy, Like there's like some like, again, like lighthearted, like, let's try something new, let's try something different. Like, we can always fix it, we can always change it, we can always do something to save the day. And I just think that's really cool. And also, I just want to throw in that the circus bugs are totally like a queer chosen family vibe. Like, they're they're so cute, and like the ladybug who keeps getting misgendered, and like, for being 1998, I'm like, this like actually movie is like pretty sweet in that way. And how they end up getting incorporated with the colony, and like this huge network gets built just by flicks like flitting about, you know? Yeah, what do y'all think about this movie being connected to Gemini season?
Think, okay, it's interesting because this is a childhood movie, right? So if you're a millennial, this movie came out in 1998. I was 5 years old. But even my Gen Z siblings, like they watched this movie too. So I have seen this movie probably close to 100 times because my siblings are like 7 to 11 years younger than me. That like as I got older as a teenager, all these kid movies that I watched were like then repeated on the loop, and Bugs Life was one of those. And it's interesting because I think Bugs Life just made it to one of the like major streaming platforms. And it's funny, I just watched this movie on my flight home from Europe back home because it was available on the flight. And when I got back, I told my next door neighbors, I was like, oh yeah, I watched A Bug's Life. And we were talking about, they're like, we just watched it too. And it was like, it's almost like it's having a resurgence, but it's like so cosmically timed during Gemini season while we have this trine from Pluto and Aquarius, because like I didn't realize when I was a kid that this was like a class consciousness raising movie, but you watch it now during Gemini season while Pluto and Aquarius. And even my neighbor was joking, and like she was saying, she's like, you know what radical, like if someone was to ask her what radicalized her, she'd be like, the ants from Bugs Life. Like it totally is just like power to the people, class consciousness. So it really, to me, just feels so of the moment. Pluto and Aquarius, Sun and Gemini, networks coming together. And it's like not because, you know, Gemini could be any network, right? It could be any network, right? Like for any reason, right? Like Gemini is not going to discriminate. They're just like, I'm going to connect with people because we share curiosities, we share fascinations, we share interests, we're learning, we're sharing whatever. But with Pluto and Aquarius, you know, kind of in the picture, it's like we're networking because we are like networking to build class struggle. We are networking to build power to the people. We are networking to make change. So Bugs Life, like I'm like, this is gonna be one of those movies that when I have children one day, I'm totally gonna be okay. Like, this is one of the movies that like I will encourage them to watch because it is just like consciousness raising in a way. So shout out to the makers of that movie.
Yeah, I feel like it ties in nice with the fern goalie too. And Danny, there's like one part of the like your just written description of the movie where you like reference the
Well, they
seed.
say that almost exact same line in
That's
Bug's
why.
Life. Like, it's like almost the exact same line. Yeah, but can you, what is that line again, just so our listeners can remember?
Yeah, it's like this idea that I can find it again, but this idea that the seed contains the tree, or the tree, or like the seed is like
Well, how
contains.
everything that made their giant tree was already contained in something so small.
Yeah. So this idea that the smallest things can contain the biggest themes, and that's just like very poetic and true. But also this idea of like the resources are just, it's so evident to me. Like they're literally gathering food for themselves, for other people. Like they're doing the labor, and then the grasshoppers are just taking the food with and like benefiting from their labor without actually contributing to it. It also reminds me of another movie that radicalized me as a child, Over the Hedge. Did y'all ever watch that one? It's basically like the just to give you a quick preview, the premise is that these animals wake up from hibernation and they find that the forests they lived in have been developed into like a suburban community. It's the same thing. It's like animals figuring out how to live in this sort of world of like exploitation where like their food sources are impacted. So again, not the same, but relatable in the sense of like kids movies talking about these like major sort of themes that are present in like movements and like, all these other social justice stuff that's going on. So I really have a lot of respect for people who make children's things because a lot of people undervalue it because they undervalue children. But like, really, some of the best freaking stories come from fairy tales that are meant for children, come from like movies that remake those stories. So we've been using children's stuff lately for our story connections, but I really feel like that's also kind of feels Gemini of like honoring that sort of like process of, we might be adults, but we can still learn like children and we can still benefit from things that are made for them. And then also it just feels like the Trojan horse reference with the Trojan bird. Like that's one of those movies where you can watch it literally at any age and appreciate the people making it and the references they're making.
Anybody else have anything else to say about A Bug's Life? I just rewatched it to write that summary and it's great. So you should watch it. It's really clever too. This is what I want to say. It's really cleverly written. Like everything, there's a point where they're in this like bug city at like a bug bar, and he goes, like a mosquito sits down at the bar and is like, Bloody Mary, O positive. And it's like a little drop of blood for the mosquito to drink. It's so good. It's so good. All right. Well, we're almost done here. Emily, do you want to do our personal reflections for today?
Yes. And so just want to kind of pull all the threads together because Gemini very much is like a weaver. So today we've talked about Gemini season. We are in the last day of the sun being in the sign of Gemini as we are recording. And so we've been reflecting on the past month of the sun being in the sign of Gemini. We have woven in the Knight of Swords, the tarot card that Dani pulled. We have woven in Lavender as our plant ally for this season. And we have woven in the story of the Pixar movie A Bug's Life, and how all these themes kind of come together and weave together to illustrate and tell the story of Gemini. And then we wove in Anthony Bourdain and his natal placements in Gemini, his Mercury and his Venus, and also highlighted some of the transits. Thinking about Gemini, which is a network building, very curious sign, very relational sign. So we invite you to reflect upon, journal about, discuss with your, it's Gemini, if you want to discuss this with a friend, what networks are you a part of? What role do you currently play within those networks? And what do you have to offer your networks? And as we are offering and giving, it's also important to receive. So, what do you need to receive from your networks? Networks are, this beautiful to be a part of a network, of a community that really is like sustainable and lasts. It needs to be reciprocal. So, thinking about what are you offering and giving? And that also, I know it's hard to receive. Acknowledge that, like, as you are giving, you deserve to receive care and love from your community. So, what do you need from your networks? And then also, I really think about this as someone who burned out from community organizing because I wasn't showing up in the most aligned ways. So, what is the most soul, body, heart aligned ways for you to show up within your network so that you can show up in ways that are sustainable and support you? So, what are those ways that you can show up that are sustainable, connective, and inspire collective delight so that we can all continue showing up for each other until the end of time? So, those are our reflections.
And that is our Gemini season Astro Church sermon. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Soul Connections. To support the show, Please share this episode with a friend and give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
This podcast is an act of community co-creation with artwork designed by Bree Legan and original music written, produced, and performed by Sophia Mock, Queen Bonobo, Liv LaFlove, and Danielle Renee.
To connect with us or a guest, visit the links in the show notes. Until next time.